Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Bullying SOS, Support and Strategies for Parents. My name is Dr. Samuel Sia, but you can call me Sam, or Dr. Sam, as the kids call me, and I'm happy to be the moderator for this evening's webinar. Tonight's discussion is an important one. We want to be able to share tips with you. Also, towards the end of the webinar, we want to be able to answer your questions. By the end, we want you to be able to understand that bullying behaviors or being vulnerable to bullying could be related to a skill deficit. That is something you can teach or address. Also, we want to leave you with some practical advice for a child that you know who is struggling. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer in the upper right-hand corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Before we get started, we want to share with you a bit about what Morneau Shepell does. Morneau Shepell is the world's largest provider of health, behavior, and productivity solutions, helping over 500,000 people each year through therapy, education, and coaching. I specifically work within children's support solutions, and that's kind of an arm that helps families, schools, and childcare centers to identify children's needs and help them reach their potential. We work with infants to young adults of all abilities and believe that every child is unique. And understanding that uniqueness is what we do best. We provide a wide range of services including screening and assessments, one-to-one and group interventions, medical legal rehabilitation, and solutions for schools and daycares. We also work within a multidisciplinary model. We have a special offer from CSS. Mention you participated in Bullying SOS, Support and Strategies for Parents when you book an appointment with Children's Support Solutions between now and December 31st. And we'll take $40 off the administration fee. Quite a deal. After the webinar, just visit our website, www.childrensupportsolutions.com, or call our toll-free number, 1-866-653-2397, and you can speak to one of our friendly intake coordinators. Children's Support Solutions is family-centered and interprofessional, meaning that we always start with the questions, what will work for this child, and what is right for this family? We think about the mix of services that will help the child, and in the Morneau Shepell model, professionals are not just under one roof, they plan together, train together, and work together on a client file. It is an integrated approach to helping the family. Our therapists and educators are trained and certified in a wide range of disciplines, including clinical psychology, speech-language pathology, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, behavior therapy, special education, guidance counseling, and tutoring. I would now like to introduce our speaker for this evening, Ann Douglas, who's the author of numerous books about parenting, including most recently Parenting Through the Storm, an honest and authoritative compendium of advice for parents who are living with children who have mental health, neurodevelopmental, or behavioral challenges. A passionate and inspiring speaker, Ann delivers keynote addresses and leads small group workshops at health, parenting, and education conferences across the country. And in fact, in April 2012, Ann was one of 16 Canadians invited to Rideau Hall to discuss family policy with Canadian Governor General David Johnston and his wife, Sharon Johnston. Her website is www.anndouglas.net, and it's a fabulous website full of tips for parents with children with some of these challenges. And you can connect with her on Twitter at Ann Douglas. Over to you, Ann.
And I'm so happy to be part of this webinar. It's a really difficult topic and one that I feel very strongly about, and I'm sure we're going to have some content that some people find a little upsetting, because if your child is struggling, you are struggling, and I just want to acknowledge that up front because I know this isn't easy. And we will have time for some discussion, some questions at the end, and I'm really looking forward to that because it's the insights that you bring to events like this that really enrich things for all of us. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit briefly about why this issue matters to me so much. And it's multi-layered. I remember when I was a child growing up being bullied, and for decades, not years, for decades after the fact, my confidence was badly shaken. It was almost as if when I looked out at the world and saw myself, I was still seeing myself through the eyes of the people who had bullied me when I was growing up. So this can have a really long, long impact, cast a very long shadow in a person's life. And then when I think about wearing my parenting hat, I found it devastating to watch two of my own children be bullied. One of the saddest incidents was when my daughter was in grade 8. She was being badly bullied, and her reaction was to attempt to harm herself. So it was a very devastating event for her and for our family. And then when I think about one of my son's experiences with bullying, I remember one particular incident where he was being badly bullied in gym class to the extent that he felt that he couldn't participate in gym class. And sadly, he ended up failing the class. And I always felt that there were other ways of dealing with that situation. And it was really painful to see him pay the price for an episode of bullying. So it is something that really resonates with me on so many levels. And I think that we also need to acknowledge the fact that bullying is a societal issue. A lot of what passes for humor in our society is about put-downs and making fun of people and that kind of thing. So our kids are paying attention to this. Is it any wonder that they're a little confused and they're not quite sure how to respond with compassion as opposed to making fun of other people when we pass that off as just the way it is? Or, you know, we're thankfully finished our election season for now, but even the political attack ads, don't those messages really speak volumes and resonate with our kids? So I guess what we want to think about as parents is what are they hearing in our culture and what are they hearing in our family? If you're talking on the phone or they look over your eye when you're on Facebook, are they seeing you treating other people with kindness and respect? Because obviously you are a huge role model in your child's life and you're going to have a major impact on how they act in the world. But now I want to move on and talk a little bit about why bullying happens. And I think a big piece of the puzzle that we don't sometimes talk too much about is the fact that friendship skills don't come easily or naturally to every child. Some children really struggle to learn the art of being a friend, and some children need a little extra help learning how this works. So, I mean, when I think back about my own growing up experiences, I was that kid that found it too stressful to play birthday party games. I just wanted to hang out in the kitchen upstairs with the parents. I did not want anything to do with the insanity that was musical chairs. And some children feel that way. And I've seen my own children sometimes struggle with learning how the rules of friendship work. How do you make friends? How do you keep friends? What do you do if a relationship hits a rough patch, as relationships do? Is it easier to fix things, or do you just walk away? And what happens if you are dealing with other issues, like maybe you have emotional regulation challenges, you're quick to anger, or you're very impulsive? That can make friendship even more difficult. So we need to acknowledge that. The good news is that when there's a skills deficit involved, you can learn, you can grow, and that's the positive and encouraging message. So what you want to do is consider what is realistic for your child right now. You need to respect your child's temperament. You need to consider where he's at developmentally, and then look for ways that you could help your child to build on his friendship skills. So for example, is there some kind of activity that he would enjoy and that would provide him with opportunities to work on his friendship skills? When I interviewed parents for my book, some of them gave me examples of ways they had done this in their own family. So it's hard to be the host. If you have weak social skills, it's hard to play the role of host. So you might find it easier if there's a shared activity like going bowling or going swimming or going to the movie with a friend. That is a lot easier to carry if you're not quite feeling confident about friendships yet. Or when you think about inviting a friend over, don't make it an all-day marathon session. If your child is still new to this whole friendship arena, have the friend over for a short duration of time and make it a really successful experience for the child who's visiting as well as your own child. Parents I interviewed also made, I think, what is a really important point is to remember that you want to keep your child's friendship goals in mind. Sometimes we feel like, oh, my child should have dozens of friends and so on because maybe you're a social butterfly. Don't let your feelings about friendship dominate what your child wants and needs for themselves. Your child doesn't have to be a social butterfly, but he should have the opportunity to develop some basic functional social skills, because that matters a lot. And as you're looking for ways to help your children to work on these skills, look for allies beyond the family. Get to know the parents of other children in your friend's class. One of the parents I interviewed for the book said, you know what? You might not necessarily score any more birthday party invitations for your child, but if that other parent hears their child saying something unkind about your child, they may jump to your child's defense because they know your child and they know your family, and they may try to explain to their child what's going on and encourage them to err on the side of kindness. So you want those allies in other families. And then, of course, think about making an alliance with your child's teacher. Maybe the teacher can think about ways that your child could work on his friendship skills at school. And this is an issue you probably want to talk about on an ongoing basis with the teacher, because even things like classroom placements at the end of the year, if your child has a hard-won friendship, it's taken them all year to make a friend, it would be great if those kids could be kept together the following year. And if there's like an ongoing conflict, maybe it would be great if those children took a break from each other for a while. So those are the kind of things that you want to talk about with the school, understanding that what you're doing is you're sparking a conversation. You're not dictating to the school what you think is should be done, because they have to balance out the needs of all children. Another thing you can do with your child is to help your child to understand how her behavior affects other people and vice versa. So maybe there are some behaviors that are making her more vulnerable to bullying or contributing to difficulties in her relationships. This isn't about blaming the child for these behaviors. This is just about recognizing that sometimes if we don't make eye contact with another person, or we speak too quietly or too loudly, or we interrupt people repeatedly, sometimes people find that really annoying, and it makes it harder to maintain a friendship. So talk about those kind of things. Give your child a chance to role play some of the behaviors, like what's the impact if when they're trying to talk to you, you won't make eye contact with them. They can see it's really hard to stay engaged in a conversation if somebody's looking down at the ground or playing with their phone. And when you're watching movies together or watching a TV show together, encourage a child to play social skills detective and to see how characters in novels or movies, or even people you see in your local coffee shop, how they interact with one another, for better and for worse, because we can find examples of, social skills that are carried off beautifully, and we can see examples of things that might have been handled a little better. So give your child the opportunity to work on some of these underlying skills, like emotional regulation, for example, that will lead to improvements on the friendship front. You want her to identify strategies that will work best for her in regulating her emotions, because what works for you may not necessarily work for her, and help her to understand how learning to control her emotions, how to make her emotions work for, not against her, will function better in relationships. So you want to talk about how it's hard to be friends with somebody if it's a friend who's constantly losing their temper and lashing out or acting impulsively and stuff, and how that affects people. So if you want to help your child to develop some self-regulation skills, think about playing games that work on the underlying skill. For example, maybe you played this game growing up like I did, the game Mother May I, where you have to listen really carefully to the instructions, and then you have to ask, Mother May I, and the person who you're playing the game with has to say, yes, you may take 5 giant steps or whatever. And sometimes you get so excited that you forget to say, Mother May I, and then guess what? You're back on the starting line. So that's an example of a game that requires a lot of thinking. And also look for tasks that require a lot of perseverance and persistence, because that helps to build that ability to postpone gratification and to stick with a task that is really, really hard. Like maybe when you're choosing jigsaw puzzles, choose one that's just a little bit challenging, not the easy one that your child can do practically in their sleep, but one that would cause her to have to work at it a little harder and a little longer. You really want to encourage your child to adopt what is known as a growth mindset, as opposed to thinking that they have to be perfect at these things all the time. Nobody sits down and can do an 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle quickly or easily or without a little frustration. That's hard for everybody. So By persevering, she'll learn how to do harder things. And it's all about learning and growing and embracing failure as feedback. So you don't look at when you make a mistake in a relationship, you don't say, oh, I've blown it, I'm a terrible friend. No, you say to yourself, I think I can handle that better, and you keep trying. And sometimes you say, yay, now I know my friend really doesn't like that. Now I have information I didn't have yesterday. You also want, of course, because this is part of our job as parents, to let your child see you modeling self-regulation. So talk through the processes that allow you to walk away from your computer to take a break from a software glitch before you return refreshed and able to deal with the frustration. I'm winking at our moderator here because I'm sure she was modeling amazing self-regulation skills for her family in the background. And then talk about the kind of decision-making process that goes on in your head, how you keep big picture relationship goals in mind when you're dealing with frustrating situations at work or with family members or on the street. If it's important to you to stay connected and have a happy relationship with your sister, then sometimes as adults we learn to bite our tongue or choose our battles and to look for ways to work through the relationship rough spots. So help your child to understand that. It's not like you and your sister get along perfectly every second of every day. You work hard to make the relationship work as well as it does. And if you're feeling really, really frustrated, you might do what I do quite often, which is go for a walk around the block, get rid of some of that frustration, bring your anxiety level down, and then you feel like you can dive back in again. So you're going to help your friend or help your child understand how friendships work, to dissect social encounters so that your child can say, you know, if this happens, this might be a way of handling it. Treat the whole world as a social emotional learning lab and help your child to sort of share their observations with you about what's working and what's not working. Share examples from your own life of times you handled situations really well and situations when, you know, you just didn't quite handle it as well. Talk to them about what you learned from that. Maybe you snapped at your best friend and you had a big falling out that you weren't ever able to repair. Talk to your child about the fact that, you know, it was devastating and disappointing for you and you don't want that for them. Talk about things that can make things better or worse in the moment. Like maybe look at between siblings. What could you say to make your brother feel better? What could you say that would make this situation worse if your brother's already angry and upset? You know, and talk about how we have choices in the moment and choices in relationships. Of course, you want to have fun with the idea of perspective taking too. It's always fun to do this if you are sitting in a restaurant, for example, and one of you can see through the front windows and the other person can see what's going on in the kitchen, and share your perspectives. It's like, oh, I see somebody chopping chicken. Oh, I see somebody parking a car. Those are two very different perspectives taken from a snapshot in the same room. The lesson being, of course, that we all have different perspectives on identical situations. If you have more than one child and you've had them, you know, come to you in a fight, both arguing their case of how they're right and how the other brother or sister is the one in the wrong, you know this, you live this, and kids need to know that there's no absolute truth. It's all through our own filters. Big thing here, help your child to understand that conflict in relationships is normal and that relationships can be repaired. Talk about why conflict happens and talk about what to do if a conflict has occurred. It's about learning and growing from the experience and not being afraid to say sorry if you've blown it, because you know what? We all blow it. And as you work through these experiences, you become more self-aware. You understand that if you're feeling tired and frustrated, it's probably not the best day to try and do something really stressful with a friend. And realizing that, you know, it's all about being human. Could you take a break? Could you reach out for support? What could you do to make things better? So now we're going to talk about bullying. The sad thing is that bullying is incredibly common. Approximately 1 in 3 Canadian children is bullied on a regular basis, putting them at risk of a variety of mental and physical health problems that happen during childhood and that extend into later life. The fallout of bullying can include physical injury, social problems, emotional problems, and even death, as we've seen with some very tragic and high-profile cases in the media. It can lead to depression, anxiety, headaches, school refusal, and problems with self-esteem. It increases the likelihood of substance abuse, academic problems, and violence in relationships down the road. And the biggest risk is for those children who both have been bullied and who are bullying others. So if your child is involved in both sides of the bullying equation, that's when there's particular cause for concern. So what can adults do? Well, for starters, they can be alert to the signs of bullying, and these can include all kinds of different things depending on the situation. You could see in your child some mental health difficulties, depression, loneliness, social avoidance, anxiety, low self-esteem. You could see changes to your child's physical health. Maybe they have headaches or stomach aches, or they're not sleeping well. You notice some kind of change. Maybe you notice behavioral changes. Your child doesn't want to go to school even though your child used to love school. Or you notice self-destructive behaviors. Your child is injuring themselves or expressing worrying thoughts, or maybe they're running away from home. There's unexplained injuries. There could be lost or stolen materials, like of your child's possessions could have gone astray, and maybe they're too embarrassed to tell you what happened to them. Some children face an increased risk of being bullied, and I tell you as a parent, this breaks your heart. Children who show signs of depression, anxiety, or excessive aggression when they first start grade school are at risk of being chronically victimized by their classmates 2 years later. Other risk factors. Any child who is seen as being quote-unquote different from their peers is at increased risk. It could be the way they look. It could be the way they behave. It could be any number of things. And sometimes as a parent, you just shake your head because you don't really understand why your child is the child who's being bullied. Sometimes these children are seen as being weak and not able to defend themselves. Sometimes they have few friends or are less popular or have weak social skills. One interesting thing that the research has shown is that if a child has weak social skills, the problem can perpetuate itself over time because that child doesn't have the same opportunity to play with other children, so they can't build friendship skills that other children are developing in a more natural way. So what can parents and teachers do to help? A whole bunch of things, fortunately. A big thing is to let your child know that you understand that it's really hard to talk about bullying. He may feel embarrassed and he may fear retaliation from the person who's been bullying him. You may find that he's more willing to talk about what happened if you encourage him to tell you what happened and where it happened as opposed to grilling him about who did it, because that can take away a little bit of the fear about talking about it. You can still help him to figure out how to handle the situation better by having the conversation about what is going on, and you may even pick up some clues by asking where it's happening, about ways to keep your child safer in the moment. So don't feel like you have to have all the information in order to try to make the situation better. Some information is better than no information, and over time your child may actually feel safer and better able to open up and tell you what's going on. Figure out what other adults may be able to help with the situation. Teachers, school bus drivers, sports coaches, any other adult who is present in your child's life. They have the opportunity to make a difference. You may want to seek out some additional support for your child by tapping into mental health services and supports. And if you feel like your child is in immediate danger, you may need to involve the police as well. Whatever course of action you take, it is so important to follow up with your child repeatedly. You don't just have one conversation about bullying, you have an ongoing conversation about bullying. You want to reiterate the fact that you care and that you're taking the situation seriously and that you're going to keep monitoring the situation. You don't want your child to feel like the situation is hopeless or that she has to deal with this on her own. You need her to know that things can get better and that you will be there to support her every step of the way until they do. So what are a couple of parenting strategies you could use to try to make things better for your child right now? Because it does break your heart when you see your child struggling and going through such a terrible time. Ask yourself, what would make things better for my child right now? It's such a simple question, but sometimes if you ask yourself that question, you have the opportunity to make a real difference. Could you advocate on her behalf? Could you help her to advocate on her own behalf? Or does she simply just need to know that what is happening is not her fault, you don't blame her, and you promise to help? Another powerful strategy is to validate your child's feelings. Validating your child's feelings simply means telling your child that her feelings make sense. It makes sense to be sad and afraid if you're being bullied. So She doesn't have to feel embarrassed about those feelings. They make total sense. Anybody would feel sad and afraid after experiencing what she's been going through. The next one is a hard one, but it's an important one, and that is to be a center of calm in your child's life. You want to be a bit of an emotional anchor. You can be really angry and upset or even devastated by what is going on with your child, but it's so important for you to remain calm about the situation. The last thing you want is for your child to say, "This is so upsetting for mom and dad, there's no way I can tell them what's going on," because they just can't handle it. Imagine how scary that would feel to be a child who feels like they can't tell their parents what's going on. And you want her to learn how to calm herself by connecting with you. It's this magical thing called co-regulation, where when we're feeling really awful and out of control, if we can connect with another person who's calm, that helps to calm us. Think about what we do with babies, how we rock them back and forth in our arms and say gentle, kind, soothing things. Or even if you've had a horrible day at work and you come in the door and you're completely stressed out, leaning up against somebody you love, it's like the best feeling in the world. Suddenly things seem manageable again. Sometimes we think that, my child should be able to calm themselves down. They're a big kid now. Well, we need to remind ourselves that we, even adults, benefit from regulating our emotions with the help of another person throughout our entire lives. Another strategy is to encourage your child to treat himself with self-compassion. Help him to change the voice in his head from one that's really self-critical. He might be saying things to himself like, "I'm a loser and it's my fault that everybody hates me," to a voice that is so much kinder, the kind of things he would say to a friend who's struggling, like, "I'm doing the best that I can in a really difficult situation." And then it's not just about changing the voice in your head, it's also about moving to action. Asking yourself, what would make things better for myself right now? It could mean that he needs to spend time doing something he loves. Maybe he has a favorite activity that could bring joy to his life right now. Or spending time with people who love him unconditionally like you. Help him to figure out what some of those things might be, and then come up with a plan for making them happen. And of course, important reminder for parents, model self-compassion yourself. Let your child see you treating yourself with self-compassion, because you know what? Self-compassion is truly contagious. So just a couple of concluding remarks from my part of the presentation tonight. Bullying may be common, but we shouldn't simply accept it as a childhood rite of passage. We should continue to look for ways to make empathy and compassion the new norms for our kids and to equip them with the skills they need to function well within relationships. If it takes a village to raise a child, we want to ensure that the village provides an environment in which all children are able to thrive. So now, through the rest of this presentation, let's talk a little bit about ways we can create that village and how we can deal with the challenges our children are facing in their lives right now. I want to share a couple of resources with you. I do get into bullying in my book, so there's a little link to my website, and there's tons of resources on it. I'm a bit of a resource person. And then two resources I really wanted to flag for you. PrevNet, which is Canada's National Bullying Association. They do amazing research in this field, and they have all kinds of practical tip sheets on their website on how to deal with bullying. And likewise, Red Cross Canada is doing some amazing work in bullying prevention. So that's another important link for you to have. And I know they're going to share the slides with you later on, so don't feel like you have to write down that unwieldy URL in your spare time or scroll it on your hand. You don't have to do that. You'll have this again.
All right. Thank you, Anne. I think we can all agree that was a very informative and very interesting presentation. Now we're going to begin answering questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Okay, our first question here is, what if your bullied child begs you not to get involved and they don't want to address the situation themselves, yet it is affecting them negatively?
I'm going to jump in and start to answer that.
Sure.
And Sam and I think, are going to do a tag team thing here, and so it'll just be a random surprise for you who answers the question, or if we both answer a particular question. But I think that it's so important to let your child know that part of your job as a parent is to do everything in your control to keep them safe and help them thrive. but that you also understand that it is very scary to be the person who's being bullied, and that you won't do anything that will immediately put them at risk. So you're sort of balancing off their need for privacy and their fear with your need to take action if there's a really pressing threat. So you could say to them, I understand right now that you don't want to tell me who the bully is. Let's not even go there. I just need to know, where is this happening, or what situations is this happening in? Because then I can talk to your teacher and we can say, okay, well, if it's happening on the playground, you know, behind the swings or something where nobody can see my child at recess, then maybe the strategy is we're not going to go in that part of the yard, or the teacher's going to walk through that part of the yard. You can start brainstorming possibilities. So let your child see that it is possible to make things better by talking it through, and that you will respect their need for safety and privacy.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective as well as a psychologist, sometimes kids feel more comfortable talking with kind of an external source as well, someone who they think, you know, isn't as close to the situation. So that might be a good time as well to ask them if they feel comfortable talking to somebody else, like a counselor or a psychologist, to see if they can get another source of help. Here's another question. Let me see here. My 8-year-old son was bullied by his coaches. We spent many hours helping him through the situation, and they never apologized to him. I think it would have made a world of difference to help him heal, but they aren't going to do that. Any suggestions on how to help him trust coaches again?
Sam, why don't you take the lead on that, and then I'll add a couple little thoughts after you're done.
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to really try and engage the coaches as much as you can, and trying to figure out exactly what was going on in the situation. Was it intentional on the part of the coaches? Did they know what they're doing? Because oftentimes, you know, coaches, they can be from different eras and have different techniques to try and coach their team, which may or may not be acceptable in today's day and age. So I'd really try and engage them and see what it is that was going on from their perspective, and also what your son was perceiving as well. So that's how I would start.
Yeah, I really like that advice, and the only thing I would add is just thinking about, you know, these kind of situations that have played out in our family over the years, to let your child know that if they feel like they were being bullied or mistreated, that they absolutely didn't deserve that, and that it makes sense the way they're feeling about that, because it is really hard, and some children are more sensitive, so what one child might perceive as a little pep talk or something to somebody else could be quite devastating. So I think that just to really recognize that it can be scary and hard sometimes for kids.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that answer, Anne. It looks like we are out of time for questions. We will keep track of all questions that have come in, and we'll be posting more information on the Children's Support Solutions website based on those questions. I'd like to thank Anne Douglas and thank everyone for attending today's webinar, Bullying SOS, Support and Strategies for Parents. If you have any other questions, please visit our website, http://childrensupportsolutions.com, or call 1-866-653-2397.